The lights felt too bright for her tired eyes. A little black street girl stood on the giant stage, barefoot and trembling, her small hands wrapped around an old, scratched guitar that looked as fragile as she did. The crowd whispered among themselves, some curious, others amused. She had never seen so many people in one place before. Her stomach grumbled quietly, and she pressed a hand against it, trying to hide the sound. A loaf of bread on the judge's table caught her eye, and she swallowed hard, her throat dry. The host smiled awkwardly and asked, "What will you be singing for us today?" She took a deep breath and whispered into the microphone, her voice small and shaky. "If I sing well, will you give me plenty of food?" The room fell completely silent. No laughter. No chatter. Just quiet disbelief. One of the judges leaned forward, eyes softening. "Yes," he said gently. "Sing for us." Her fingers trembled as they brushed the strings. The first note came out thin and weak, but then her voice followed raw, cracked, yet full of something deeper than music. Pain. Hope. A story that words alone could never tell. Every lyric was a memory, sleeping under streetlights, sharing scraps with stray dogs, dreaming of her mother who had disappeared into the city one rainy night. The audience could feel every word pierce through the air, each note heavier than the last. It wasn't just a song, it was a cry, a quiet prayer to be seen, to be heard, to be loved. Her voice wavered, then soared higher, filling the hall with a power that didn't seem possible for someone so small. Tears glistened on her cheeks, but she kept singing, pouring out everything she had until her voice broke into silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, one by one, the audience rose to their feet, clapping through their tears. The judges stood too, their applause echoing through the hall. The man who had promised her food stepped onto the stage, carrying the loaf of bread from the table. He knelt beside her and placed it in her trembling hands. She stared at it as though it were gold, then looked up, eyes wide with disbelief. "For me," she whispered. "For you," he said softly. "You've already given us something greater than a song." She smiled, small, shy, but glowing. The cameras flashed, the audience cheered, and in that moment, she wasn't just a poor girl anymore. She was a voice, a story, a heartbeat that had reached every soul in the room. She walked off the stage clutching the bread close to her chest, whispering a quiet thank you. And though the lights dimmed and the crowd moved on, her song lingered in the air, proof that even the hungriest heart can fill the world with beauty when given a chance. The old theater smelled of dust and lights, but for the little black street girl standing behind the curtain, it smelled like hope. She clutched her cracked guitar tightly, her fingers rough and shaking. Her shirt was torn, her feet bare, and her stomach empty. She could hear the crowd laughing and talking beyond the stage. They didn't know her name, and she didn't expect them to care. But when the host called her forward, she stepped into the light, blinking as the heat hit her face. The audience quieted, confused at first, then curious. She took a deep breath, looked at the judges, and spoke softly into the microphone. "If I sing well," she said, her voice trembling, "you give me plenty of food?" The words floated into the silence like a fragile wish. The hall went still. One of the judges, a woman with kind eyes, nodded gently. "Sing," she whispered. "We're listening." She closed her eyes and began to play. The first note cracked like dry wood, but her voice carried something no one expected, truth. Every line told her story, the hunger, the cold nights, the loneliness of streets that never loved her back. The audience could hear the pain in her tone, the way her voice shook but refused to break. Her song was simple, but it reached into every heart, pulling tears from people who didn't even know her name. The light shimmered on her face as she sang of her mother's lullabies, the sound of rain on the shelter's roof, the dream of one warm meal. Her voice rose, trembling but strong, as if she were lifting herself out of the darkness with every word. Then the last note fell like a whisper, and the room was silent again, so silent it felt like time had stopped. The judges stood up, eyes wet with tears. The kind-eyed woman walked toward her, holding a basket of bread and fruit from the table. "You never have to ask again," she said, voice breaking. The girl's hands trembled as she accepted the food, her eyes wide with disbelief. The audience erupted in applause, their cheers echoing like thunder. She smiled shyly through her tears, hugging the basket close to her chest. For the first time in her life, she felt seen not as a beggar or a burden, but as a voice that mattered. As she walked off stage, the cameras still flashing, she whispered to herself, "Mama, I sang well." And somewhere deep inside, she knew that one song had changed everything, not just her hunger, but her fate. The crowd was loud, lights blinding, and cameras flashing. In the middle of it all stood a small black street girl, barefoot, holding a broken guitar that looked too big for her thin frame. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, taking in the sea of faces waiting to be entertained. She wasn't here for fame or applause, she was here because she was hungry. When the host asked her name, she whispered it softly, almost afraid to speak. "Maya," she said. "And what will you be singing tonight?" Maya hesitated, then looked straight at the judge's table where loaves of bread and fruit rested as props. "If I sing well," she said quietly, "will you give me plenty of food?" The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, but it hurt. She lowered her gaze until one judge, a kind-faced woman, nodded gently. "Yes," she said. "Sing for us." The hall fell silent. Maya strummed her guitar, the sound uneven, but the moment she began to sing, the world seemed to stop. Her voice, small and trembling, carried the weight of every empty night she had spent on the streets. She sang of hunger, of rain-soaked cardboard roofs, of the sound of footsteps that never stopped near her corner. Her words were simple, but her heart was enormous. The melody wrapped around the room like a whisper of truth, touching everyone who heard it. The audience leaned forward, forgetting to breathe. Her voice cracked, yet each note felt like a heartbeat, raw, real, and full of life. By the time she reached the final verse, tears streamed down her face. She wasn't just singing anymore, she was pleading, hoping, believing that her song might buy her one meal, maybe even one tomorrow. The last note faded into silence. No one moved. Then a single clap echoed, followed by another, until the entire audience stood, clapping and crying. The kind-faced judge walked to the stage, her eyes shining with tears, carrying the bread and fruit from the table. She placed it in Maya's trembling hands. "You have the voice of someone who's lived 1,000 lives," she said softly. "You'll never sing for food again." Maya stared at the bread, as though it were gold, then looked up, smiling through her tears. The cameras clicked, the audience cheered, and the lights glowed warmer. As she walked off the stage, clutching the food close, she looked back one last time and whispered into the microphone, "Thank you. I sang well." Outside, under the soft glow of the city lights, she sat on the curb and took her first bite. The bread was warm. The stars above her shimmered, and for the first time, she felt full not just in her stomach, but in her heart.